I want to tell you something that cost me decades to understand properly. The single most dangerous thing you can do with wealth is not necessarily invest it badly. It is not pay too much tax. It is not even lose a chunk of it in a foolish deal. The single most dangerous thing you can do with wealth is signal it, because a bad investment can be repaired, a bad tax bill can be survived, a bad quarter can be forgotten. But the moment you send a clear financial signal into the world, you set loose forces that are almost impossible to control after the fact, and most of those forces do not arrive wearing horns. They arrive smiling, they arrive familiar. They arrive dressed as curiosity, friendship, concern, admiration, support, partnership, opportunity, fairness, or love. That is why people miss the danger. I have watched money destroy things that poor judgment could not destroy. I have watched families survive business failures and market crashes, only to fracture around a single conversation in which someone became too honest about what existed, what was coming, what was possible, or what someone believed they were entitled to. I have watched 3 generations of disciplined accumulation get weakened by one loudmouth at one dinner table. I have watched men who understood compounding perfectly still fail at the one part of wealth that matters most. Once you have some of it, which is containment. People assume the purpose of wealth is to become more visible. That is exactly backward. The purpose of wealth is to increase your freedom. And freedom almost always grows better in silence than in exposure. So let me give you the frame that changed everything for me. I call it the signal problem. Imagine you are in open water at night. The sea is black. The horizon is gone. You are not drowning. You have a raft. You have food. You have a compass. You are not comfortable in a luxurious sense, but you are absolutely fine. In your hand is a flare gun. Now think carefully. When do you fire it? You fire it if you are dying. You fire it if you need rescue. You fire it if the alternative is disappearance. But if you are not drowning, you keep that flare in your hand and say nothing, because the flare does not only attract the rescue ship, it attracts everything in the water. It attracts curiosity. It attracts predators. It attracts other people's desperation. It attracts people who decide very quickly that your position might solve a problem in their life. Money works exactly like that. When you talk about it, display it, dramatize it, perform it, explain it, celebrate it, or even casually reveal it, you are not merely sharing information. You are firing a flare. And once that flare goes up, the signal cannot be recalled. People like to imagine that trouble only comes from bad people. That is childish. Most trouble comes from ordinary people under pressure. Neighbors, co-workers, cousins, friends from school, your own children, sometimes. Not evil people. Just people whose needs, anxieties, ambitions, resentments, and calculations suddenly begin to orbit around a new fact they did not have before. They do not even always realize they are doing it. That is what makes it so dangerous. Human beings are pattern-making creatures. The moment they detect surplus, they begin relating to it. That is not a moral failure. That is human nature. The failure is yours if you hand them the signal in the first place. Once I understood that, silence stopped feeling like paranoia. It stopped feeling antisocial. It stopped feeling rude or cold or evasive. It started to feel like what it actually is, which is risk management. We spend so much time in finance talking about diversification, leverage, downside protection, taxes, liability, interest, rate risk, market risk, operational risk. Very few people spend enough time talking about social risk. But social risk is real, and in personal wealth it is often the most corrosive risk of all because it enters through relationships. Relationships are not spreadsheets. They are emotional ledgers, and once money gets written into them too clearly, the whole accounting changes. That leads never let anyone know the real number. I do not mean that you should be theatrical about hiding. I do not mean you should act strange or pretend to be helpless or build some ridiculous false image. I mean something much more disciplined than that. Protect the actual figure. Your net worth, your liquid assets, your account balances, the exact amount you received from a sale, the exact value of the business, the real size of the portfolio. The specific number is sacred. Because the human mind does not process money in absolute terms. It processes it relationally. If people think you are generally doing well, they still mostly speak to you as a peer. There is room for equality in that ambiguity. There is room for normal conversation. There is room for mutuality. Everything changes. That number becomes a ruler. Every dinner bill gets measured against it. Every gift gets measured against it. Every favor you decline gets measured against it. Every complaint you make sounds different. Every purchase you do or do not make gets interpreted through it. You stop being a person. you become a reference point. And once you have become a reference point, the relationship is no longer clean. It is being priced. I have lived in the same house for a very long time. I have eaten simple breakfasts. I have driven ordinary cars. People often call that eccentricity because they need every unusual form of restraint to be a personality trait rather than a strategy. It is not eccentricity, it is concealment by normalcy. When you live simply enough that people interact with you as a person rather than as a balance sheet, you preserve an enormous amount of negotiating power and emotional freedom. The house that does not announce itself is protection. The car that does not declare victory is protection. The watch that says nothing is protection. Even your casual language becomes protection. Your lifestyle is information. Your address is information. Your taste is information. Your comfort with certain price points is information. Every vendor, contractor, attorney, broker, salesperson, and negotiator is gathering clues about your reservation price, your pain threshold, your surplus, your willingness to absorb cost. This is not malice. This is how people price in the real world. They are trying to infer what you can bear. The quieter the signal, the more honest the negotiation can remain. The louder the signal, the more your wealth gets priced into every interaction. That is why the best negotiators I know are rarely the loudest rich people. They are the ones who appear to need a good deal more than they actually do. They can pause, they can walk away, they can say they are thinking, they can indicate that capital is tied up, that timing is awkward, that things are under review, and because the signal they send is controlled, they retain leverage. Most people throw that away because they want the emotional sugar of being recognized as successful. That sugar is expensive. So when someone asks how you are doing financially, you do not owe them a complete accounting. You do not owe them a number. You do not owe them the shape of your balance sheet. You owe them whatever amount of truth keeps you honest without firing the flare. Things are fine. Things are a little tied up right now. I am being conservative. We are comfortable. There is a lot going on under the surface. All of these sentences can be honest. None of them betrays the number. Protecting the number is not shame. It is ownership. Now, let us never announce a plan before it exists. This one destroys astonishing amounts of momentum because people do not understand what the brain does with applause. When you share an exciting plan too early, a new business, a product, an investment approach, a move, a deal, a pivot, a framework, a strategy, and people around you respond with admiration, encouragement, surprise, or envy, your brain gets rewarded immediately. You receive emotional payment before you have built the thing. The chemical system that should have been reserved for completion starts paying you for intention. That is a terrible bargain. Because the reward arrives early, and the work that remains now feels flatter, heavier, and less urgent. You got the dopamine without earning the outcome. The mind begins confusing announcement with progress. That is why so many people love talking about what they are building, and then quietly fail to build it. They already consume part of the reward in social form. I have seen this over and over. People think talking gives them accountability. Sometimes it does, in narrow cases, with the right small circle. More often it gives them theater. The business is not real, but the identity of person starting the business already starts to take shape. The deal is not done, but the pleasure of being seen as strategic has already been taken. The project is not finished, but the person now feels as if they have moved because the social world responded as though they had. Plans do not need applause. They need oxygen. Silence is oxygen. There is something else even more dangerous than the premature reward, and that is the premature objection. A plan that does not yet exist is fragile. It is still mostly imagination tied to discipline. When you expose it too early, you invite other people's fear into a structure that has not yet hardened. Their doubts get planted in soft ground, their caution, their experiences, their bitterness, their failed attempts, their limited frames. All of it begins whispering inside your own uncertainty. You do not need that. I do not care how much people love you. Love does not prevent projection. Some of the most discouraging advice in the world is delivered tenderly by people who care about you. Build first, show second. If the thing exists, then criticism can refine it. If the thing does not exist yet, criticism can kill it. The great builders are usually maddeningly quiet while they are building. They seem evasive. They change the subject. They say they are working on a few things. They do not give details. And then one day they appear holding something real, something completed enough that opinion can no longer stop it. That is the correct sequence. There is also a competitive reason for this. Information is currency, markets, careers, businesses, and negotiations, all run on asymmetry. You increase the chance that someone else crowds the path, lifts the idea, distorts the price, front runs the move, or simply turns your advantage into shared information. That is stupidity disguised as openness. I have made investments slowly and quietly over long periods. If I had announced them while I was still accumulating, I would have moved the price against myself. The silence was not my preference. The silence was part of the return. Your plan deserves the same treatment. The world can examine your result after it exists. It has no right to a preview. The third rule is one almost nobody practices, and they suffer for it. Your edge is not for public distribution. Your edge is whatever gives you asymmetry. A knowledge advantage, a sourcing advantage, a behavioral advantage, a network advantage, a pricing advantage, a timing advantage, a niche no one else understands, a pattern you see before others see it, a way of structuring something that creates more value than the default way. That edge is your recipe. And I want you to think about how recipes behave in markets. Any genuine edge exists because there is an information gap somewhere. A pricing gap, a misunderstanding, a blind spot. The opportunity lives in the asymmetry. The moment the asymmetry disappears, so does the edge. The world is crawling with people begging to be taught other people's edges, courses, master classes, secret systems, frameworks, playbooks, paid communities. You can make a lot of money selling the map to a mine, which is why so many people do exactly that once the mine starts getting crowded or once they discover that selling the dream is more scalable than quietly digging. Sometimes the teacher is legitimate and simply now in a different business. Fine, that happens. But I want you to absorb the logic behind this. If a person has found a live vein of gold, they do not hold a seminar at the entrance while the vein is still rich. They keep digging. If a method is truly producing abnormal returns and still has room to work, the last thing a rational operator does is widely distribute it. That is why your real edge must be treated like intellectual property. Look at Coca-Cola. People laugh at how carefully they protected the formula. They call it quaint. It is not quaint. It is proper. The recipe is the margin. If the recipe diffuses, the advantage erodes. Your business model, sourcing method, pricing logic, buyer psychology, acquisition channel, investment framework, or whatever else gives you edge deserves the same seriousness. Maybe you are not running a global consumer brand. That is irrelevant. If your edge is the thing producing excess results, then publicizing it is self-harm. And yet people do it all the time because the ego gets lonely. They want to be seen as the one who figured it out. They want admiration. They want authority. They want social proof. Fine. Then understand the trade. You are often converting edge into applause. That might be a good trade if your new business is teaching. It is a terrible trade if your current business is still exploiting the edge. Crowded trades die. Crowded methods get arbitraged away. The move is gone. Do not feed your own erosion. The fourth rule is the one that lands hardest inside families. Do not discuss your inheritance plans in operational detail with the living people who expect to outlive you. I know that sounds harsh. I know modern culture loves radical transparency, family honesty, courageous conversations, and all the rest of it. I am not against honesty. I am against giving people a future number that begins quietly rewriting their present character, because that is what knowledge of inheritance does. People think the danger is greed. Sometimes it is. More often the danger is softer than that, which makes it more destructive. Once a person really knows significant money is coming, their internal economics change, not overnight, not always visibly, but necessity weakens. Urgency softens, the willingness to endure discomfort changes, risk appetite changes, appetite for building something alone changes. The mind starts using future money as invisible padding, even when it pretends not to. That is human. If you love your children, you should want them to discover their own capability in conditions that actually require capability. The greatest inheritance is not a number. It is the proof built through life that they can survive, build, decide, and endure without rescue. I have long believed in giving children enough that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. People always quote the line and then immediately reduce it to the amount. The amount matters less than the knowledge. A child who knows the number too early is altered by it. A child who grows up with no exact promise remains more fully in contact with reality. They build muscles under real load. They discover who they are without the narcotic of a guaranteed landing strip. And then there is the second family danger, which is even more practical. Money becomes language. The moment you begin explaining who will get what and why, you are no longer merely discussing an estate plan. You are creating a system of interpretation. Every child hears ranking, every spouse hears signals, every imbalance, even if justified, becomes emotional evidence. Logic does not survive contact with family money as well as people imagine. You may have perfect reasons. One child needed more, another already received more. One works in the business, another does not. One is special needs, another is not. Your reasons may be impeccable. That does not matter. What people hear is hierarchy, and hierarchy in families creates wounds faster than law creates clarity. I have seen loving families become political parties around an inheritance that had not yet been distributed. The damage did not come from the actual money. It came from the conversation. Keep the estate plan between yourself, your spouse if applicable, and the professionals charged with implementing it. Your children need to know you have handled things. They do not need an operating spreadsheet. They do not need percentages. They do not need conditional promises floating in the house for 20 years like emotional gas. Let the money arrive after the character has already been formed. Anything else is too often sabotage disguised as honesty. The fifth rule is the most invisible and, in some ways, the most refined. Do not speak about the good you do. We live in a world that confuses generosity with its public performance. Giving has become branding. Virtue has become content. People do one decent thing and immediately aim a camera at it or convert it into a story about what kind of person they are. I do not like that world. Not because I object to helping, because I object to converting the private proof of character into a public instrument for attention. My father used to speak about the inner scorecard and the outer scorecard. The outer scorecard is what other people think. The applause, the image, the rank, the social confirmation. The inner scorecard is what you know about yourself when no one is in the room. That scorecard matters far more. When you help someone privately, when you solve something, give something, lift something, absorb something, and you tell no one, the act changes you differently. You gain private evidence about your own character. No audience was needed. No social return was extracted. You did it because you were that person. That kind of self-knowledge is immeasurably more valuable than performative reputation. There is a financial angle here too, because there is always a financial angle if you look carefully. Public generosity creates expectation. Private generosity creates strength. Once people know you are giving, they begin organizing themselves around your giving. Requests increase, pressure increases. The line between kindness and obligation gets blurry. You attract not only admiration but eligibility. Private virtue is armor. Public virtue is exposure. You do not need everyone to know you are decent. You need to actually be decent. That distinction protects both your wallet and your soul. There is a companion principle to this. Do not broadcast your struggles either. Not your financial strain, not your business anxiety, not your liquidity problem, not your fear, not your internal chaos. This is not because vulnerability is weakness. It is because pressure points are information, and information gets used in competitive environments. And the world is more competitive than polite people like to admit. Your desperation is a negotiable asset for the other side. People smell urgency and price against it. The person who appears steady, slow, and unhurried has enormous power because timing stays in their hands. Desperation is one of the most expensive emotional states on earth. It makes people sell at the wrong price, borrow at the wrong rate, partner with the wrong people, accept ugly terms, reveal too much, and move too early. Silence buys you time, and time preserves judgment. Now, I want to stitch the whole system together because these are not isolated rules. They all serve the same master principle. Wealth compounds best in low-friction environments. That is one of the deepest truths I know. People think compounding is just arithmetic. It is not. It is arithmetic plus behavior plus protection from disruption. Every time you reveal the number, you create friction. Every time you announce the plan too early, you create friction. Every time you distribute your edge, you create friction. Every time you politicize the inheritance before it is necessary, you create friction. Every time you turn private virtue into public theater, you create friction. And in a compounding system, friction is devastating, not because it looks dramatic in the moment, because small drags, sustained over years, alter the final destination enormously. The difference between a fortune that compounds quietly and a fortune that lives in the glare of other people's calculations is not marginal. Over a lifetime, it is the difference between independence and management. By consequence, most people do not need more financial complexity. They need a smaller circle. I am not arguing for isolation. I am arguing for design. Your spouse should know, your most trusted advisor should know. Perhaps one or two other people whose judgment has been tested, not imagined, should know the pieces relevant to their role. That is all. Most circles are too large because people confuse emotional closeness with strategic necessity. Those are not the same thing. Some people can love you and still be the wrong audience for your numbers, your plans, your methods, your estate structure, or your acts of generosity. In fact, many of the worst audiences are the ones emotionally closest to you because the signal hits them deepest. Tighten the circle. Make disclosure purposeful, not conversational. Do not reveal because the room got warm. Do not reveal because you wanted to feel seen. Do not reveal because silence made you nervous. Silence should be your default, and disclosure should require a reason. There is one final principle beneath all of this. The strongest signal of real wealth is often the absence of performance. The men and women who are actually secure do not need to announce that they are secure. They do not build their identity out of visible wealth, because visible wealth attracts the wrong kind of attention and weakens the negotiating position in almost every meaningful area of life. I have known loud rich people. Many were hollow, leveraged, overexposed, one bad year away from embarrassment. The display was not evidence of strength. It was often compensation for fragility. I have known quiet, wealthy people too. Different breed entirely. They drove ordinary cars, lived in ordinary houses, wore nothing declarative, and moved through the world with a softness that made them easy to underestimate. That underestimation was not an accident. It was part of the fortress. Underestimation is one of the cheapest luxuries real wealth can buy. It lets you negotiate. It lets you observe. It lets you be treated like a person. It lets your children grow up in cleaner conditions. It lets your plans survive until they are real. It lets your edge keep producing. It lets your generosity stay pure. It lets your family life remain about the family instead of orbiting around the gravitational pull of a future estate. That is the whole philosophy. Not paranoia, not meanness, not secrecy for the thrill of secrecy. Just understanding that money is a flare, and the water is full of things you do not need swimming toward you. So keep the flare down. Protect the number, build in silence. Hide the recipe. Keep the inheritance plan on a strict need to no basis. Do your good work quietly, and when you have built something truly meaningful, something worth admiring, you will discover the most pleasant truth of all. You no longer feel any need to talk about it.